So I grew up in, I'd say, a middle-class home. We went to church on Sundays. Most of the time it wasn't because I was looking for God, it was because I was looking for friends. Well, I went to college. That's when I was introduced to drugs. Cocaine became very popular for me. Just the whole bar atmosphere I chose to dive right into. You know, I graduated, found a job that I really started succeeding at. I was actually promoted at that job to take on different levels of responsibility around the nation, and one of my first deployments was back in my college hometown. I'd been there for about a month and a half, and I ran into a really good friend of mine from college. We decided that we were going to a Jimmy Buffett concert. You know, we left and we were drinking and we were just having fun in the car. It was a college road trip, as you will, except we never really made it to the destination. When we hit the tree, my friend went through the windshield, and the young lady that was with us was thrown about 20, 35 yards. She's maimed to this day. My friend obviously died, and I broke 27 bones, including 4, 5, and 6 of my vertebrae. You know, I'll never forget the day that my parents had to come in rehab, and they had the conversation that it was very possible that I was going to jail for 40 years for intoxicated manslaughter and intoxicated assault. When I left the hospital, I chose to go home with my parents, and I remember the guilt hitting me like a Mack truck. I can't describe to you how far away from God I felt. Instead of turning to Jesus, I turned to more drugs, turned to more alcohol. I was on a mission to hurt myself even more. There was a girl that I was dating at this restaurant, and she came to me one day, and I'll never forget, and she said, I'm pregnant. I remember a prayer of, God, if you really don't like me this much, why are you hurting her? I remember thinking I was his guinea pig, that he was just going to abuse me, and that for some reason I'd drawn the short straw because of the bad things I'd done in my life. I was so sure that he was so mad at me. I was so sure that I had nothing to offer. I was so sure that I had crossed the line and that I couldn't go back. It was about 3 months after that we decided to get married, much to everybody's chagrin. And during this time, God had started sending Christian men into my life, and they took interest in me. And then they would help me, and they would guide me in the right direction. I ended up going to trial, and the judge stopped everything. He looked me square in the eye, and he said, you know, Mr. Germer, I see a lot of these cases a year. He said, but there's something sort of different here. Can you tell me, are you in a program? Are you doing anything? What seems to be helping you? And I remember sitting there for a second and dropping my head. And before I knew it, I looked up and I said, Jesus Christ. And you know, in a lot of ways, that was the first time I think I ever felt peace. In a lot of ways, I think that was the only time I ever felt that things were going to be okay. I was left with restitution, I was left with probation, I was left with some jail time, and I had to go AA twice a week. Even though I was starting to experience freedom in my walk, was probably the hardest one because I was dealing with all the emotions that I had always shoved down through my drug addiction. I was walking through all those emotions, and whatever it had done to other people's lives, I was like this tornado that just ripped through everything and got to the other side, and when I got sober and thought everything was okay. I'd been in AA for about a year when my pastor called me in, asked me to take over for Celebrate Recovery. It was at our church. And I remember looking at him saying, are you kidding me? I'm barely functioning as it is, and you want me to lead something? And I remember that night going home and praying with my wife, as excited as we were. I remember my prayer of, God, you can't use me. How could you believe in me enough to do this? Don't you know what I've done? I can barely run my own life, very much run a ministry for you. There's no possible way. Over the next 4 years, the Celebrate Recovery that I had been asked to be the ministry leader of grew from 40 people to 150. And there were stories of freedom all around, but it was one step at a time. It was one Friday night at a time. It was one meeting at a time as God started showing me that He could use somebody that was broken.